I was already running when the night turned against me. The cobblestones beneath my feet were slick with moss, and even jagged enough to threaten a twisted ankle with every desperate step. The air reeked of something rotten, like wet earth mixed with burnt wood, and yet I couldn't afford to stop and gag. Behind me too close, something moved with a rhythm no human body should possess. It wasn't footsteps, it wasn't even breathing. It was like the scraping of bones dragged across stone, quickening whenever I slowed. My throat burned as I tried to scream for help, but the sound barely made it past my lips before the wind swallowed it whole. The alley narrowed, crumbling walls leaned in on either side, their shadows pressing down like a coffin lid. My vision blurred, whether from exhaustion or fear I couldn't tell. Then, just for a second, I thought I heard my name. Not spoken, not shouted, whispered. A voice dry and cold, threading its way through the night air, as though it had been waiting for me to pass by. That was when I made the worst mistake of my life. I looked back. For the briefest moment, the darkness itself seemed to have eyes. Pale, lidless, fixed on me with a hunger that didn't belong in any living thing. I could see nothing else, just those eyes, endless and patient, staring through the night as if they had all the time in the world to follow me. I stumbled forward, crushing against the walls, scraping my palms raw against stone as I tried to keep moving. My body screamed at me to collapse, but the fear drove me harder than adrenaline ever could. I ran with the certainty that if I stopped, even for a breath, those eyes would catch me, and I would never leave that village alive. And then, suddenly everything froze. The sound of pursuit, gone. The whispers, gone. Even the wind held its breath. I found myself standing in the middle of a broken alleyway, chest heaving, heart pounding against my rib like it wanted out. The silence was heavier than the chase had been. That's when it hit me. I shouldn't even be here. I had been warned. I had been told stories half joking, half serious, that no one should step foot in this village after nightfall. Some people said the place had been cursed since before their grandparents were born. Others claimed it wasn't even on a map, that the land itself rejected anyone who dared to stay too long. I thought those were just stories, but stories have a way of punishing those who don't respect them. How did I end up in this nightmare? What made me think I could laugh off the warnings and walk straight into a place where even the bravest refuse to linger? You want the truth? Fine. I'll tell you everything. But you need to understand something before I begin. The story I'm about to share with you, it isn't entertainment. It isn't one of those harmless ghost tales you tell around a campfire. What I saw, what I lived through, it changed me in ways I can't undo. Even speaking of it now feels like scratching at an old wound. One that never healed and never will. Still, maybe it's better if someone else knows. Maybe, if I tell you, you'll believe me, and maybe you'll be smart enough to stay away from places like this. Because I wasn't. And the truth is, some secrets should never be touched. Some doors should never be opened. And some villages should never be entered after dark. But I did, and that is where everything began. Asterisk before that night. My life was painfully ordinary. I woke up late most mornings, wasted hours scrolling through my phone, and filled the silence with background noise from podcasts or YouTube videos. Horror was entertainment to me. Creepypastas, urban legends, half-baked ghost stories told by strangers online. I never believed any of them. Not really. If anything, I laughed at how dramatic people could get when describing shadows in the dark. It's funny how arrogance disguises itself as curiosity. The first time I heard about the village, it wasn't from some dusty old book or a wise old man warning me away. No, it was in a group chat. My friends had dug up a thread on a forgotten forum, some half-abandoned corner of the internet where people shared stories that were supposedly too real to post anywhere else, normally. I would have ignored it. But there was something about the way they phrased it. The villagers didn't leave willingly, and they didn't all leave alive. That one sentence stuck with me like a splinter. Come on, man. My friend Amir had texted. You're always saying these things are fake. Prove it. Let's go check it out. At first, I brushed it off. The idea of creeping round some rural ghost town in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly my idea of fun. But then came the bait. The line I couldn't ignore. What's wrong? Scared. That was all it took. Pride is a stupid thing. I told them I'd go, no hesitation, no second thoughts. And just like that, the plan was set. In the daylight. It almost felt like an adventure. The group chat buzzed with excitement. We traded screenshots from the forum, blurry pictures of collapsed houses, strange symbols painted on walls, whispers of the last night the villagers were seen. None of it looked real to me. Half the photos were too pixelated to make out, and the stories felt like recycled campfire material. But deep down, I couldn't shake the way that one line echoed. Didn't leave willingly. Didn't all leave alive. It was such a small difference from every other ghost town story I'd ever heard. But it made everything heavier. Somehow, at dinner one night, I mentioned it to my mom. Not the part about actually going, just the rumors. She froze halfway through chewing and set her fork down. Which village? She asked. I shrugged. Gave her the name I'd read on the forum. I expected her to laugh, to dismiss it the way I had. Instead, she went pale, as if I'd spoken something I wasn't supposed to. You shouldn't joke about that place, she said. People died there. Her tone was flat, but her eyes were sharp with a fear I didn't recognize. She wouldn't say more. When I pressed, she changed the subject and told me to drop it. Of course, I didn't. If anything, her reaction made me more determined. That's the thing about warnings, they only work on people humble enough to respect them. And at that time, humility wasn't something I had much of. So I kept scrolling through those grainy images, half daring myself to believe. The more I looked, the more details I noticed. One photo showed a house with windows bricked shut from the inside. Another displayed what looked like a shrine, overgrown but strangely intact. And then there was the comment buried deep in the thread, left by someone whose account had been deleted. Don't go after dark. They'll know you're there. No explanation, no context, just that. I laughed when I read it. Sent it to the group chat as proof of how ridiculous these people were. But I didn't delete the screenshot. Something in me refused to. The day we finally agreed to go, the weather was beautiful. Clear skies, warm sunlight. The kind of day that makes you forget bad things can even exist. I remember how loud my friends were. How much they joked as we packed top snacks and drinks like we were going on a picnic instead of a trespass. The contrast was almost absurd. Normal life buzzing with laughter and music, set against the creeping shadow of the decision we'd already made. I told myself it was just a story, a challenge, a chance to prove how fearless I was. But looking back now, I realize the truth. The moment I said yes, the moment I agreed to step foot in that place, something shifted. The weight of that choice hung over me, like a storm cloud waiting for the right wind. I thought I was just going on a dare, but you can't dare the dead without paying the price, and that's what none of us understood, at least, not yet. The road narrowed the closer we got. Asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to dirt, until finally we were following a single, rutted path lined with trees that seemed to lean just a little too far inward, their branches forming a kind of crooked arch overhead. The sun was still up, but the light felt weaker here, as if it had to fight harder to reach us. Double quotes, man. This is straight out of a horror movie. Amir laughed from the back seat. All we're missing is creepy banjo music. I forced a laugh. But it came up then. Something about the air was different, heavy, charged. Even with the windows rolled up, I thought I could smell smoke, faint but sharp. As if the village had been burned down yesterday, instead of decades ago. We passed through a small town just before reaching the village proper. A woman sweeping her front step paused to watch us roll by. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared, her eyes flat and unreadable. At a roadside stall, an old man selling fruit raised his head when he saw us, then shook it slowly. "You're heading the wrong way," he called out as we stopped at the only gas station. His voice was cracked, like old wood. "We're just exploring," Amir said with a grin, leaning halfway out the window. "Don't worry, we'll be back before dark." The old man's eyes narrowed. "No one comes back the same." Then he turned away, refusing to speak again. I wanted to laugh it off, but his words stuck to me like buzz. Even as we drove on, the silence in the car stretched longer than it should have, until one of the others cracked a joke about discount fortune tellers. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. By the time we reached the edge of the village, the sun had dipped lower than I realized. The trees opened up, and suddenly the road spilled into a cluster of houses, all leaning inward as if they were huddled together against some long-forgotten storm. Roofs sagged, windows were shattered or boarded shut. Weeds crawled through the cobblestones, thick enough to look like veins pulsing beneath the ground. The strangest part wasn't what we saw, it was what we didn't. No birds, no dogs barking, not even the faint hum of insects. The village was silent in a way that pressed against your ears, like being deep underwater. "Hello," Amir shouted, cupping his hands round his mouth. His voice bounced off the walls and came back distorted, like the village itself was mocking him. "Real original." I muttered. "Relax," he said, slapping my shoulder. "It's just a bunch of empty houses. Creepy, yeah, but nothing's gonna jump out at us." I wasn't so sure. We split up to explore, though I stayed closer to the group than I wanted to admit. The first house I stepped into groaned under my weight, the floorboards sagging like ribs. The air smelled of damp stone and mold. But there was something else, to something metallic, like dried blood. On one wall, scratched deep into the plaster, were symbols I didn't recognize. Circles intersecting with jagged lines, repeated again and again until the wall was nearly covered. I backed out quickly, pretending I'd seen enough. Near the center of the village, we found what looked like a shrine. The wood was rotted, the offerings long since crumbled into dust, but the structure itself stood strangely untouched, as though whatever decay had claimed the houses had decided to spare this one. A rope hung across the entrance, frayed but unbroken, with tiny paper charms still clinging to it. Amir started to step forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said, too sharply. He grinned, raising his eyebrows. "What, you scared?" I didn't answer. The truth was, yes, I was. The air around that shrine felt heavier than the rest of the village. Like stepping too close would set something in motion that we couldn't stop. "Fine," he laughed, backing off. "We'll save it for later." But even as he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside had already noticed us. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't just an abandoned village. This place was watching. The deeper we wandered into the village, the more wrong it felt. The silence wasn't still anymore, it was alive. It pressed against us in waves, bending the air like heat over asphalt. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, but every time I turned, there was nothing. At first, I thought it was just my nose. Old houses cast long shadows, and the wind had started to move through the hollow windows, warping them into shapes that looked almost human. Almost. But then I noticed something that froze the laughter in my throat. The shadows didn't match us. We walked in a line down the main street. The evening sun stretched our figures across the dirt, but scattered among them were others thinner, sharper, darting across walls even when none of us moved. Okay, that's creepy as hell. One of my friends muttered, probably just the light, Amir said, though his voice cracked just enough to betray him. No one argued. We just kept walking, pretending not to notice the way those extra shadows seemed to follow closer with every step. Then came the sound. At first, it was low, like the hum of machinery deep underground. But as we moved closer to the center of the village, it rose layered voices, too many to count, chanting in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. The syllables didn't belong to any language I recognized. They rolled like thunder and snapped like fire, weaving into a cadence that felt older than anything human. We froze. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Amir grinned nervously. "Man, if someone's filming a horror movie here, they're about to get some free extras." No one laughed. The sound grew louder, then stopped all at once like the breath of something huge holding still, waiting for us to move again. We ducked into one of the houses, more to escape the silence than the sound itself. The place reeked of mildew, its walls warped by time and dampness. In the corner, half buried under fallen plaster, was a leather-bound book. It wasn't like the others we'd seen scattered around. This one looked deliberate, like someone had placed it there on purpose. I picked it up. The cover cracked under my fingers, but the pages inside were shockingly intact. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, as though written by someone who didn't have much time. Most of it was incoherent, a frantic account of nights without sleep, of strange lights and voices outside the window. But one passage caught me. They said never to answer when the voices call your name. The ones who did, they never came back inside. Or if they did, it wasn't really them anymore. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, my heart hammering harder each time. The ink was smeared, but the desperation was clear. Whoever wrote this wasn't telling a story. They were leaving a warning. Anything good? Amir asked, peering over my shoulder. Nothing. I lied quickly, snapping the book shut. The last thing I wanted was for him to think this was a game worth pushing further. We stepped back outside. The air was cooler now, though the sun hadn't fully set. That's when I saw it. Across the street, in the upper window of a sagging house, someone was watching us. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't just a shadow. I could see the outline clearly, a figure standing perfectly still, its head tilted slightly, as if studying us with detached curiosity. "Hey," I hissed. Pointing, everyone turned. But as soon as they did, the window was empty. Nothing but shattered glass and peeling curtains swaying in the faint breeze. Amir shook his head. "You're spooking yourself, man." But I wasn't. I knew what I'd seen. The unease that had been simmering since we entered the village finally boiled over. The diary, the chanting, the figure in the window, it all pressed together into a single realization. We weren't alone here. We tried to laugh, to pretend nothing was wrong, but none of us spoke much after that. We just walked faster, eyes flicking to every shadow, every doorway, waiting for something else to move. Then, clear as the first whisper of a nightmare, I heard it. My name, soft, almost tender, breathed directly into my ear, though no one stood beside me. When the whisper curled against my ear, I spun so fast I nearly lost my footing. Nothing. No one. My friends were several feet ahead, shuffling nervously toward the town square. None of them had spoken. "Did you?" I started, but the words caught in my throat. If I admitted it out loud, it would become real. So instead, I swallowed hard and followed, though every step felt like I was being reeled deeper into a trap. That's when the village truly woke up. The first door slammed behind us with such force it rattled the ground. We all jumped, laughter spilling out almost reflexively. Amir smirked, raising his hands. All right, whoever's doing the haunted house routine, props to you. You got us. But then another door slammed. And another. Soon it was like a storm breaking round us doors, shutters, even loose window frames banging in a rhythm that felt coordinated, intentional. Okay, that's not the wind. One of the others whispered. We hurried forward, trying to shake it off, but the noises followed us, circling, echoing through the alleys. Footsteps joined them, soft at first, as though someone was trailing just behind us, careful not to be heard. But the more we walked, the bolder they grew, heavy, dragging steps crunching the gravel, quickening whenever we did. I glanced back again and almost wished I hadn't, for a fraction of a second. I saw them figures at the far end of the street, blurred by distance, standing perfectly still. The moment my eyes focused, they were gone, as though they dissolved back into the shadows. Tell me you saw that. I hissed. Nope, Amir said too quickly. His grin was forced now, brittle, not giving you the satisfaction. We tried another street, then another. That's when we noticed it. No matter which turn we took, we kept ending up in the same place. The square. Every path bent back into itself like a twisted loop. It doesn't make sense, I muttered, staring down a row of houses that should have led us out, but funneled us straight back to where we started. It's like the whole place is folding round us, Amir said, trying for a joke. We just really suck at navigation. But his laugh cracked halfway through. We all felt it, the walls closing in, the certainty that the village wasn't just abandoned, but alive in some way, bending itself to keep us here. That's when I remembered the diary. Not the warning I'd read aloud, but the line I hadn't told them. They never came back inside. Or if they did, it wasn't really them anymore. And something else, scribbled faintly at the bottom of the page like an afterthought. I hadn't read it clearly then, but the words burned in my memory now. There was something the diary didn't say. I muttered. What? One of my friends asked. I shook my head. Nothing. Forget it. But they wouldn't forget. Neither would I. We stumbled back to the shrine we'd seen earlier, desperate for answers. The rope still hung across the entrance, paper charms trembling even though no wind stirred. My eyes caught on carvings along the wooden beams, faint, worn, but recognizable. A circle of figures kneeling round the central shape. At first, I thought it was a flame. Then I realized it was a person. Sacrifice. The old stories clicked into place. A village emptied not by famine or war, but by something darker. A betrayal sealed with blood. The chanting we'd heard before wasn't random, it was ritual. Repeated endlessly, echoing through time. They didn't leave willingly, I whispered. They were bound here, all of them. The silence that followed was suffocating. None of us could laugh it off anymore. We bolted from the shrine, each of us convinced. The shadows pressed closer. The streets warped again, bending, circling, dragging us back into the square as if mocking our attempt to flee. That's when the apparitions stopped hiding. Figures began to step from the alleys then. Grey outlines, translucent but undeniable. Their faces were hollow, as sunken pits, mouths stretched wide. They moved slowly, but with purpose, closing in from every direction. One of my friends screamed. The sound shattered the silence, echoing back distorted, like 100 voices crying out at once. The figures froze. Then, as if responding to some command, they all turned their heads toward us in unison. We ran. Every alley looked the same. Every turn led us back to where we started. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But terror kept me moving. What if we can't leave? I gasped. No one answered. Maybe they were too afraid to say it. Or maybe they were already thinking the same thing. that the village wasn't letting us go, that we were caught in a ritual that had been repeating long before we were born, and it was only a matter of time before it swallowed us too. And in the back of my mind, the words from the diary returned, darker than before. They said never to answer when the voices call your name. I hadn't answered. Not yet. But I knew the village wasn't done calling. Asterisk, the square was no longer empty. The pale figures had multiplied, crowding the edges of the street like spectators at an execution. They didn't move closer. Not yet. They only watched, waiting. It was almost worse than if they'd attacked outright. I could feel the others trembling beside me. Amir, usually the loudest, had gone silent. His shoulders rose and fell in quick bursts, his breathing too fast. We need to hide, someone whispered. But hide where? Every door we tried slammed shut the second we touched it, as though the houses themselves rejected us. The village didn't want us to leave, and it didn't want us inside. That was when I saw it, a faint glow bleeding from a structure at the far end of the street. A building taller than the rest, with a slanted roof and rotting paper lanterns swaying outside. A temple, or maybe the place that used to be one, over there. I pointed. We ran, too terrified to think. The lanterns flared briefly as we passed beneath them, casting the courtyard in sickly gold. Inside, the air was thick with incense, stale and choking. The walls were covered in faded murals, people kneeling in rows, their eyes hollow, their hands outstretched toward a figure in the center. Not a god, not a saint, just a villager like them bound, bleeding, raised like an offering. That was when it hit me. The villagers hadn't simply vanished. They had been consumed, sacrificed to something that needed them. And maybe still needed us. I finally understood why the villagers disappeared. I whispered, my voice cracking. And what would happen to us? A sound broke the silence, laughter. But it wasn't the kind that eased fear. It was sharp, jagged, like glass dragged across stone. I turned. It was Amir. He was grinning too wide, his lips trembling as if his face wasn't used to the shape. His eyes gleamed unnaturally, almost reflective in the lantern light. What? I stammered. He blinked, and for a heartbeat, the grin vanished. His expression returned to normal or close to it. What are you looking at me for? We're all losing it, right? Just nerves. But then he said it. We should go back outside. They're waiting for us. The words hit wrong. Not we should escape. Not we should run. They're waiting for us. Double quotes. What did you just say? I asked. Amir's face twitched again, a shadow of something slipping beneath the surface. He forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. I said we should find a way out. That's what I meant. No, I whispered. That's not what you said. The others looked at him, fear sharpening into suspicion. Don't turn on me now. Amir snapped, his voice carrying an edge that wasn't his. We need to stick together. If we split up, we're done. But the way he said it didn't sound like he meant us anymore. We argued in hushed tones, fear threatening to tear us apart faster than the spirits outside. I drifted to the far end of the temple, drawn by the murals. Beneath the painted figures was an altar, blackened with age. Scattered on it were scraps of parchment, so brittle they crumbled at the edges when I touched them. On one, barely legible, were the words, "The village does not let its children leave. It needs them. When they are gone, it takes others. The ritual must be completed. If not, the hunger spreads." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a hunting, it was a feeding ground. Outsiders weren't cursed by accident. They were lured. The ghosts weren't just lost souls. They were recruiters, swelling their numbers with every generation. I turned back to the group, heart pounding. It's a trap. That's what this place is. It feeds on people. That's why no one left alive. That's why we can't leave. No one spoke. The only sound was Amir's breathing, harsh and uneven. Then he whispered, "Maybe. That's not so bad." We all froze. His eyes gleamed again, brighter now, reflecting the lantern light like water. His smile stretched too far. "You're not him," I said. He tilted his head, almost curiously, like a child caught in a lie. "Of course I am. Who else would I be?" But then, under his breath, he muttered something too low for the others to hear. I caught only fragments. "Ritual. Chosen. Not ready yet." I backed away. "We need to get out of here. Now." We stumbled back outside, lantern light clinging to us like a fragile shield. The figures were closer now, lining the street, unmoving, watching, waiting. In the distance, I saw another glow, a faint red pulsing from a sunken structure half buried in the earth. It looked like the entrance to a cavern or a tomb. I knew, instinctively, that it was the heart of the ritual, the place where everything began, and maybe the only place where it could be ended. But Amir was muttering again, louder this time, like a prayer in a language that didn't belong to him. "Stop," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "You are not yourself." He jerked away violently, his face twisting into something almost inhuman. "I'm fine," he barked. "You're the one losing it." The others exchanged horrified glances. None of us trusted him anymore, but none of us dared say it outright. Then the decision was made for us. A sudden crash split the night, the sound of wood splintering, lanterns bursting. The spirits surged closer, forcing us to scatter. Screams filled the air as we bolted in different directions, desperate to survive. I turned once, just long enough to see Amir standing still, smiling as the grey figures pressed around him. He didn't look afraid. He looked at home. And that was when I realized. Maybe he wasn't pretending anymore. I ran blindly, the red glow of the cavern flickering at the edge of my vision. My chest heaved, my legs burned. But I didn't stop, because I knew the truth now. If I didn't find that place, if I didn't uncover the last secret of the ritual, none of us would leave this village alive. And maybe I already was alone. Asterisk, the ground sloped downward, carrying me toward the pulse of that red glow. It beat like a heart, steady and sickening, reverberating through the soil beneath my feet. Every step felt less like running into safety and more like being swallowed. The entrance loomed ahead, a shattered stone arch carved into the hillside, half buried in choking roots. Faded words, etched in a language I didn't know, stretched across the lintel. They shimmered faintly as I passed beneath, like veins catching fire. The air changed instantly, cold and wet, heavy with mold and copper. The glow intensified, painting the walls in rust-colored waves. My footsteps echoed, but sometimes there was a second echo, one that didn't match mine. Inside, the passage opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling arched so high it disappeared into shadow. The floor was slick with water or blood. I couldn't tell. At the center lay an altar of black stone, pulsing faintly as though alive, and standing round it were the villagers. They weren't transparent this time. They were solid, pale-skinned, their eyes like pits of ash. Their mouths moved in unison, chanting in a rhythm that gnawed at the edges of my mind. For a moment, I froze, and then I saw him. Amir. He was among them, smiling serenely, swaying to the chant as though it had always been his. When he turned toward me, his eyes reflected the red glow, twin beacons of possession. "You came," he said softly, though his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "Good. It needs you." My throat closed. "What are you talking about?" "The village," he said, stepping toward me. "It doesn't survive on emptiness. It survives on devotion, on blood. That's why they stayed, why they offered themselves. You've seen it, haven't you? The murals, The diary, it was never a tragedy, it was worship. The villagers' chanting rose. Louder now, the rhythm hammering against my skull. I clutched my head, feeling words scrape across the inside of my mind like claws. "You're not Amir," I whispered. He smiled wider. "I'm better." The altar pulsed again, brighter, flooding the chamber with crimson light. In it, I saw visions, not dreams, memories. A child crying as her parents carried her to the stone, their faces blank with duty. A man slitting his own throat, blood pouring across the altar like wine. An old woman kneeling, whispering the chant until her jaw unhinged and her soul drifted free. I saw generations feeding this hunger, willingly. I stumbled backward, my chest heaving. "No," I croaked. "This isn't worship. It's slavery." Amir's expression hardened, twisting with something cruel. "Slavery? No. It's balance. This place gave them protection from the outside world. No famine, no plague, no war. All it asked for was obedience. And when obedience faltered, he gestured to me. It found others, the villagers, heads turned in unison, their eyes locking on me. My skin prickled as if pierced by 100 invisible needles. The chanting shifted, deepened. Words I didn't know forced themselves into my mouth. Writhing on my tongue like worms, I clamped my jaw shut, tears burning in my eyes. If I spoke them, if I finished the chant, I knew I'd never be myself again. I turned and ran. The chamber twisted round me, hallways spiraling into impossible shapes. Doors slammed where there had been none. Passages looped back into the same cursed room. Everywhere I went, the villagers were already there, waiting, staring. Whispers clawed at my ears. My name, repeated over and over, growing louder, closer. "Don't answer." I reminded myself, gasping. Never answer. But the voice that called me wasn't just theirs anymore. It was my mother's, then my father's, then every friend I'd ever had, each one begging, pleading, "Please, just say something. We're scared. We're lost." Answers. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, refusing to give in. At last, I stumbled into another chamber, smaller than the first. The altar here was older, cracked and bleeding black ichor. Symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly, revealing the final truth. The curse wasn't just in the village. It was in the telling. The village does not let go. Every tongue that shapes its story becomes a vessel. Every ear that listens becomes a doorway. Speak, Everett, and it will find you. Always. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. If this was true, then even surviving meant nothing. Because the moment I told anyone what happened, the curse would spread. And if you're hearing this now, maybe it already has. A sudden hand clamped down on my shoulder. I screamed, spinning Amir, his face inches from mine, smiling that same hollow smile. "You understand now," he whispered. "You don't escape it. You become it. That's why I'm not afraid anymore. You shouldn't be there." He shoved me toward the altar. My palms hit the stone, the ichor searing my skin like acid. Visions poured into me again, faces, screams, rivers of blood, centuries of worship. My mind threatened to splinter, but in the flood of horror, one detail surfaced, a gap in the pattern. The ritual required acceptance, devotion, willingness. If I could resist, if I could reject it, it couldn't take me. I slammed my fists against the altar and screamed into the void. Nitrogen monoxide. The light flared. The chanting faltered. Amir staggered, clutching his head, shrieking in a voice that wasn't his. The villagers' forms flickered, their edges unraveling like smoke. The chamber began to collapse. I ran. The ground shook, stones falling round me. Red light bled from every crack, chasing me like fire. The chanting warped into screams, the walls twisting into claws. Amir's voice followed me, shrill and broken. You can't leave. You belong here. You belong to it. But I didn't stop. Somehow, through hallways that shouldn't exist, I burst through the archway and into the night air. Cold wind slapped my face, stars blazing overhead. For one dizzying moment, I thought I was free. The village was silent again. The lanterns extinguished. The streets empty. No villagers. No chanting. Just me. But as I stumbled away, every shadow seemed to twitch. Every tree bent slightly closer. The silence wasn't relief, it was expectation. Because I knew the truth. Even if my body had escaped, the curse hadn't. And now, by telling you this, I've already passed it on. So if you start hearing whispers tonight, if your name is called in the dark, don't answer. Please. Don't single quotes the answer. I stumbled into my apartment at dawn. Keys clattering. Breath a thin, wet thing. The hallway smelled like stale coffee and cleaner mundane smells that felt obscene in the shadow of what I'd seen. I left the door unlocked out of habit, half expecting to find silhouettes pressed against the glass. But there was nothing. The ordinary hum of the building felt too loud, as if normality itself were terrified. Daylight helped a little. My phone filled with messages, friends checking in, my mother asking if I'd been safe. I lied. I said we'd gotten lost, that we'd slept badly and took the long way home. The words were warm and familiar, like bandages, and for a moment the knot inside me loosened. But it was only surface calm. Underneath, the world felt fissured. Small things betrayed me. A coffee ring on the table shaped oddly like a symbol I'd seen at the shrine. A faint scratch on the door frame I didn't remember making. Night was worse. Doors began to move by themselves, a soft suggestion that grew into a slam. Cabinet doors would squeak open without wind, the bathroom light clicking when no one touched it. I stayed awake until dawn. Lights on, convinced bulbs could keep whatever followed me at bay. BDID in single quotes T. Sleep came in dangerous fragments, visions of the altar, of pale faces leaning close. I woke at odd hours to whispers that skimmed the edge of hearing. Once it called me by my childhood nickname with such tenderness I nearly answered. I clamped my mouth shut until the taste of blood filled my mouth. Refusal became a discipline. I thought sharing the story would dilute it. I uploaded a careful video, vague, framed as a lesson about chasing urban legends, omitting the chant and the altar. The response was messy. Ridicule, sympathy, theories. A handful of strangers sent images, symbols matching the ones I'd seen, links to threads, warnings wrapped in curiosity. I deleted most, but a few I kept. The diary's line pulsed. Every tongue that shapes its story becomes a vessel. Weeks passed. I tried to stitch my life back together. Work was a blur. Friends came round. The chatter softened my fear for a while. We ate cheap takeout, watched dumb films. I laughed when it felt wrong. Sometimes I felt like a fraud performing normalcy while the thing I'd seen hummed under the floorboards. Signs followed. Plants that wilted overnight, leaves curling as if repelled by light. A neighbor's greeting that hit a wrong note and slid into silence. Once, reaching for a mug, I found a tiny paper charm folded and tucked beneath it, the same kind that had hung at the shrine. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a drawer and pretended not to notice. I stopped going out after dark. The city had places that felt like the village alleys where shadows pooled and stayed. People crossed the street to avoid them. I took different routes, double-checked locks, kept my phone in reach. The rituals of living tightened into habits meant to keep the dark from slipping in. They felt fragile. Then a postcard arrived with no return address. A crude sketch of the temple on the front, and on the back a single line. "We remember you." My hands shook. I called my mother. When she answered, she sounded distracted, as if someone breathed between her words. I hung up and sat in the dark, phone heavy in my lap. There are things I still withhold because speaking them aloud risks more than shame. Names, exact phrases, the rhythm of that chant, those are keys. I won't say them. It's cowardice perhaps, and selfishness, but it is also wisdom. The diary's warning mapped onto my life. Silence is not safety, and speech is invitation. Someone called me brave online. Someone called me a liar. The truth is small and enormous. I survived. But surviving felt like stepping from the mouth of one hunger into another. Telling people spread the story. Spreading the story may have spread the thing. I should stop. There's more I could tell details that would explain everything. The final verse. How the villagers rearrange themselves like teeth, but if I name them, I make keys. If I make keys, I unlock doors. So I'll end with this. If you feel a whisper when the lights go out, if you hear your name and it is not your loved one's voice, do not answer. I learned that lesson. I cling to it. Some nights it keeps me safe. Sometimes I feel its patience like breath on the back of my neck, waiting for the moment I finally answer. Last night, I heard someone whisper my name again. It wasn't anyone I knew.